Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 82, Deadly Echoes. That's right, we are doing weekly episodes because the scary algorithm wizard said I had to. I'm gonna have to figure out what to do about that, but for right now, weekly Demystified videos. I guess? Now, we have some cast announcements at the top of the episode. Ashley is not present, so Pike is still being piloted by Laura and Liam. Sam is also not present, and so Scanlan is being piloted by Marisha and Taliesin. Patrick Rothfuss returned for this game, playing Carrick the Paladin, but he's doing so remotely via Skype. So, Travis is the only player at the table having a normal one. Also, after the last episode, Scanlan, Percy, and Pike all leveled up. The asynchronous leveling is such a funny artifact of the way Matt ran this game, because after Campaign 1, it's not going to be a thing anymore. As the game opens, Vax asks Vex for his boots back, which reminds Matt to distribute the magic items they found last time, because now they would have taken a rest, they would have had a chance to identify these items. They now have a Dwarven Thrower, which is a hammer that behaves like Mjolnir. You can throw it and it'll return to you. Only a dwarf can use it, but Grog has the belt of Dwarven kind, and Matt says that the belt can essentially qualify him to use it. This weapon was clearly introduced to help solve a problem Grog has been having throughout many of these fights. He just cannot catch up with these foes that are flying or moving around the battlefield, and he can't get to them. The Dwarven Thrower can help solve that problem. They also got the Boots of Elvenkind, which gives you advantage on stealth checks. Grog also doesn't want to give up any of his attunement slots to use the dancing sword he got last episode, when he pulled from the Deck of Many Things. So he decides to give the sword to Carrick. However, as Grog pulls out the sword, he sees a woman's face with snake hair in the reflection. And then the sword rusts and he gets a severe headache. And he has a -2 to all of his saving throws now. Forever. And when the players ask if it's because he tried to hand the sword off to somebody else, like, is this a Craven Edge situation where the blade took offense to being given to somebody else? Matt quickly establishes that this was a curse that was in the blade that just took a while to set in. Now, on the one hand, I really appreciate that he's clear with the players about why this happened, to avoid them going down the wrong train of thought and wasting time trying to solve a problem that isn't really in their hands to solve. On the other hand, Matt then clarifies that this is him correcting a mistake he made in the last episode when he either misread or misheard the card Travis pulled. He pulled the card that would correspond with the Uriel card, not the key card, which means he shouldn't have gotten a cool magic item, he should have gotten a curse that would have reduced all his saving throws by 2. And again, I appreciate Matt clarifying why this is happening. He says, okay, the chat saw the card, we got it wrong, this is me correcting things. But also, this is way too big of an overcorrection. There's probably a larger conversation we could have about retcons and whether or not it's appropriate to go back and change things to how they would have gone, and generally my philosophy is that if a retcon would have actually changed how something went down, you shouldn't go back and change it. Oops, you should have taken 9 damage, not 7 damage. Okay, that's probably not going to make a big difference. You can either just mark down those 2 hit points, or just say, we'll remember it better for next time. However, if it's instead, oops, I misread my abilities, I should have gone unconscious 4 turns ago, well, okay, it's too far since it happened to rewind and change things, too many turns have happened, but maybe that's a situation where you actually do move the real consequence forward, so now they just go unconscious now. I'm sure in Matt's head that's what he thought he was doing in this scenario, and I can understand that. However, Travis could have pulled the key card, like, legitimately. If somebody tells me, oh hey, in the last session, I thought I rolled a natural 20 because there was the icon on the die, but I didn't realize that there's also an icon on the 1, and that's the one that I rolled. I rolled a natural 1 and not a natural 20. I would understand that. I've had that happen. I've gotten dice where there's something cool on the 20 and cool on the 1, but I don't know which one's which until I actually start realizing it in the middle of the game, and I'm like, oh, shoot, I didn't roll all the cool things I thought I did. But again, if it's been like 5 minutes, okay, we can go back and correct it. But if it's been a full session, like it's a week later, look, man, just say, okay, well, now we know. And really, that's what Matt should have done here. He should have just looked into the camera and said, okay, I saw online that people were confused. They thought I'd changed the cards and what they corresponded to, but I just misread the card. So the card that he should have pulled, that's still in the deck. That would have been great, because then Travis and the others would have gone, wait, what was he supposed to get? And Matt would have said, you don't know, but it's still in there. And they would have been like, oh God, what is in this deck? But I think that would have been a perfectly fair and reasonable solution. Liam even says, as they talk about this on camera, that nobody at this table is trying to get away with anything. And that's true. And I wish Matt maybe took a few more opportunities to clarify that. When someone makes an honest mistake, you don't have to grind the game to a halt to punish them. I'd respect him even more if he said, it was my mistake and I'm not going to punish you for getting something that you shouldn't have gotten, because you could have drawn the key card, but now you might still draw that other card, and I think that's really fun. And the audience now knows what that card was, and they kind of know it's like this sword of Damocles hanging over you, that's one of the bad cards in there. Even if they're not familiar with the deck, they now know about one card because it was part of this discourse. But also, you can just say, hey, it was a mistake, let's move on, we know better for next time. But alas, Matt didn't do that, even though I think he should have. I know he was still worried about showing favoritism to his players, and God forbid this has happened with Marisha. Can you imagine how his fans would have acted if he'd given Marisha the wrong card instead of Travis? Oh, the accusations that would have flown. This episode even has another Keyleth moment some people got surprisingly weird about, even though she did nothing wrong. But yeah, Matt shouldn't have done this no matter who pulled from the deck. It's just too big an overcorrection for what is genuinely just an honest mistake. Anyway, they finish going through their magic items. They give Carrick the Ring of Invisibility and the Cloak of Displacement, try to buff him up a little bit more before battle. Because this is actually not addressed in the episode. We don't learn this until the next episode, but Carrick is, I believe, level 7. And the idea behind that is that Carrick is intended to represent the fact that not every adventurer is all at the same level at all times. And I appreciate that. But obviously now that he's actually participating more with these other battles, the way the players were not expecting when he first showed up in the hot tub episode, now it's kind of going to be an issue for his survival that he is so much weaker than the rest of the party. So they have to find some way to kind of bring him up to their level a little bit. They talk about giving Pike the boots of Elvenkind to help with her sneaking, but the last time they fought Raishan, she had to use the sprinter's boots twice to reach their fallen companions who had died in battle. So they decide it's more important that she has those on. Pike casts Hero's Feast on the party as well as on Allura and Kima. They decide to leave a gate stone here with Cassandra to make sure somebody can get back here urgently if they happen to land in a TPK situation. At least someone could escape. Kima volunteers to take the stone to Cassandra, and that is a great move from Matt. Let an NPC go talk to the other NPC so we can get it done quickly and off screen and not get sucked into another scene with Cassandra. Let's just get this show on the road. Additionally, he describes how Kima is clanking away, chunk, dunk, 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 and the rest of the players realize they could give her the boots of Elvenkind. And I wonder if Matt didn't do that on purpose, describing Kima as clanking off so the players would still feel like they got something valuable out of these boots by making one of their party members a lot more stealthy. Again, if so, great work from Matt, for 2 reasons in the same scene. Awesome stuff. As they're getting ready to leave, Taliesin has Scanlan say that, for the record, this is a terrible plan, and they're all going to die. They have no plan, they're all going to die. I think that is so funny because Scanlan does always want to make better plans. That's 100% consistent with his character. But he's usually debating against Percy, who doesn't want to overplan. So hearing those words coming from Taliesin is just really, really funny to me. He really is playing the character he was given. They travel through the Sun Tree and arrive on the island, and they can see that the trees on the edge of the island are healthy and green, but closer to the mountain in the middle, the trees become withered and black. It looks like all the life has been drained out of these trees. But this happened a long time ago. This was not Raishan. The party starts sneaking towards the mountain, and Vex sees a dark patch of sand on the ground, and they avoid it. And they see a few more as they get closer to the mountain. Keyleth makes a nature check, and Matt tells her these are something called a hollow earth phenomenon, and I got so excited because I love hollow earth stories. So many of them are terrible, a lot of them are extremely problematic, but I fucking love the hollow earth, and if something has a hollow earth in it, I kind of can't hate it, even if it's objectively terrible. But this is not that. This is something considerably less interesting. Basically, these are sections where the ground underneath was magically eroded away, so these are kind of like magical sinkholes. Boo. Grog tosses a rock into one of these patches of sand to see what would happen, and eventually just sinks down like quicksand, but it leaves a hole in that spot, so kind of like a Looney Tunes cartoon or that scene in The Matrix. Okay, I'll admit that's a little cool. It's an interesting trap. Would have been better if it had actually been the hollow earth, though. They approach the mountain and they find a big rock jammed into this cave, and the rock is covered with holes, each one about the size of a gold piece. The twins make some rolls to figure out what's going on, and Matt tells them that something pierced into this rock over and over again. Some of these holes are eroded and some of them are fresh, but all of the holes are clustered in groups. And because Vex is a dragon expert, he says that these holes match the spacing of an ancient dragon's talons. This was Thordak's front door. He would grab this rock, dig his nails into it every time, his nails, you know what I mean, and move the rock, and then move it back so no one else could enter but him, and presumably now Raishan. Vex uses primeval awareness and senses that there are these 3 dragon life forms within a mile of them, past the rock and down below the earth. So that's probably Raishan and the 2 eggs. So now they have to figure out how to get inside. But before they do, Grog takes Vex aside and asks for the deck of cards back. I suspect he was originally content to just let her keep the cards because he'd already gotten something cool out of it. Maybe he even figured that other people would pull from it in the future and everyone would get a turn. I don't know. But either way, I don't think it's a coincidence that he's asking for the deck of cards back now that he basically discovered the card he thought he pulled is now back in the deck, so there's still a chance he's going to wind up pulling a powerful weapon in the future. But he also knows that Vex's character likes to barter, so he offers a trade. He has a Periapt of Wound Closure, which can stabilize her because she keeps getting killed, so something to keep her from making death saves would be a big help. It would genuinely be useful for her to have this. But in return, he wants the deck back. And Vex wants to take this deal, but she doesn't want him to have the deck of cards, so she references a scene from the end of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. She wants to give him a fake pouch that doesn't actually have the cards inside. She convinces Grog to promise not to look in the deck and not pull a card, and then they make the trade, and Matt has the two players roll against each other, deception versus, I believe, perception or insight, and she's able to give him a fake deck. And Travis, the player, is annoyed. I understand why this happened this way. First of all, if you allow your players to roll deception versus insight on each other in your games, I do think something like this is bound to happen eventually. That's why I've really scaled back on doing that in my games these days. I'm okay resolving a situation with this kind of roll if the player who's being deceived agrees to it. Like, they think it would be fun to leave it up to the dice, because that's more interesting to them. But otherwise, I'd much rather that my players consent to being fooled, because they think it would be the most logical thing that would happen, or the most interesting thing that would happen in that scenario. But also, the same scenario could have easily played out without any rolls, because the rolls aren't really the biggest problem here. The thing is, these players are justifiably frightened of this deck and what it could cause to happen, and they also, understandably, don't trust Grog to behave responsibly with the deck. They think nobody should pull from it, and so they feel that the person with the worst impulse control definitely shouldn't have the deck. This is all very logical, but the downside is it's also a little bit patronizing. And I have seen this before in a lot of other games with items much less powerful and dangerous than the deck of many things. I talked about this when the deck first showed up in the last episode, but I've run games where one player would basically insist that the other players weren't responsible enough to handle a powerful magic item. Often, I can understand the argument they're making, but the downside of this attitude is that it always ends up with one player being pissed another player wants to take away their magic item, or successfully manage to do so. And the problem is, I don't really know how to solve this problem when it happens at the table, other than just taking one of your players aside and saying, hey, I know you're playing your character, but what you're asking to do is take away a cool magic item from another player because you effectively don't trust them not to use it in the way you wouldn't. So maybe instead of taking something from another player, you can try to talk to them and maybe let them know out of character, I'm trying to play my character, but I also don't want to steal from you because that's not fun. How can we get our players on the same page about this so my character would feel more comfortable that there's not this looming threat that you wouldn't misuse this? In this scene, Vex kind of stumbles upon the solution without realizing it. She had Grog agree not to open it. She's going to give it to him, but don't ever open it, and he agrees to do so. Now, Travis knows the deck is a fake, so he's going to play along because he's a good scene partner. He's not going to metagame and just kill this scenario and say that Grog just opens the deck, because it's more interesting for him to carry the deck indefinitely, thinking he has the real thing, until maybe the perfect moment where trying to open the deck would be the most dramatic result possible, or maybe the most comedic. But it would have been nice if these two players had agreed to that scenario without rolls, and without essentially having Travis's agency in the scene taken away. My philosophy is really that the dice are used to resolve conflict between the player characters and the world at large. When you ask the dice to resolve conflicts that are exclusively between the player characters, or, the players themselves in some cases, you don't really want completely impartial dice. You want everyone to be on the same page so there's no sense of resentment, because resentment can really spoil the positive experience of the other players at the table. And I don't say this to try to be high and mighty. I have done very similar things at the table. I've absolutely done sleight of hand to figure out if you can plant something on the other players. I've let my players do deception checks or even persuasion checks. That was a huge disaster. But at this point in my career as a GM, I really recommend only going down that road if you know the other players are cool with it. And again, this is only a problem if the other player doesn't think it's kind of fun for you to steal from them. There are moments later in Critical Role, especially during Campaign 3, where some of the players steal from each other or plant things on each other, and it's all in good fun. Anyway, now is the time for the players to get through the door, so Keyleth casts Stone Shape, makes a slight opening between the rock and the wall, but that's all she's able to do with the casting of that spell. They don't just want to let Grog unload his fists on the rock because they don't want to make so much noise that Raishan might hear them. They don't know how far away she is. I mean, I guess they know she's within a mile, but you know what I mean. They don't know how easily she'll be able to hear whatever they're doing. Percy realizes they can use the gap they have to create a lever to open the rock large enough to get through, and they can close it behind them. And because Percy believes magic items don't easily break, or really break at all, they can use their Holy Avenger as their lever. Watching this scene, It kind of seems like Matt isn't really sure whether or not magic items are totally indestructible, but he decides the Holy Avenger would definitely be more durable and would not be destroyed by just using it as a lever. And given all the times the players have been submerged in lava or acid, I think it's a perfectly reasonable conclusion that Taliesin believes that magic items are indestructible. This belief is going to have a really funny payoff in Campaign 3, but we'll get there. Anyway, once they pry the rock away from the wall, they're able to wedge the immovable rods into the finger holds to hold the rock in place long enough for them to slide through the gap. The immovable rods are still outside, and they're not able to keep the rock at bay, so it slowly closes, but maybe those rods will at least slow Raishan down if she tries to escape. Now, this cave is dark, but they don't use any light sources. Instead, they just lead Percy and Carrick around by the hand, since they can't see in the dark. Again, they don't want the lights to warn Raishan that they're coming. Also, I think they forgot that Allura and Kima also can't see in the dark, but they kind of forgot about them entirely. But again, they're worried Raishan will see the light source, because I think they're imagining she's going to be right around the next corner. What they don't realize is that they just entered a dungeon. It's not a big one, it's more than just 1 or 2 rooms. It's like 4. But it is significant enough that they're going to have to deal with the dungeon for the rest of this episode. They pass a whole bunch of little broken shards of bone in the first room, many of which are blackened by fire, and because of how old they are, they assume these have been here since even before Thordak was sealed away. The best theory they have is that these are meant to essentially serve as an alarm for anyone creeping through the cave. So this is another opportunity for the players to make a stealth check, but in this case, there's actually a tangible consequence to failing. It's not just that one of them would try and fail and eat shit or something like that. There's a hazard that they're competing against. If, like I said, their theory is correct, and this is an ancient alarm system. Vax asks Pike, played by Laura, to cast Death Ward on Vex, played by Laura. But when they all point out how weird this is that he's doing that, he says it's because he feels nervous about her dying again because of this new feature Matt has announced about death, where every time they die, it gets a whole lot more difficult to bring them back to life. Because he had just announced that the modifier to bring you back to life gets a lot higher every time you die. And in fact, as they're talking about this, Matt even says, yeah, I realized maybe that modifier is a little bit too high, but I'm actually going to end up talking about this in a whole other video coming probably, I think, in 2 weeks, where we can see that Matt was really struggling trying to figure out how death would work in his games, and I don't think he ever found an answer he was really happy with, until he helped make his own game. So look for that in a couple of weeks. In the next chamber, they find some shelves with some weird stuff on them, like red candles melted down to the base, books in a language the party can't read, a petrified raccoon, not mummified or taxidermy, just petrified, whatever that means. Carrick uses Divine Sense and gets an undead reading from a skull on one of the shelves. They suspect the skull might be a camera of some sort, so they might have even blown their cover already, but they just put it in a bag and face it towards the wall like it's on timeout. But that means if anything's going to come blasting out of its eyes, or if someone's watching them, at least that won't really be an issue. In the next room, there's a pillar of green marble, with a rough bowl of iron bolted onto the top and an iron door at the end of the room. To the right, there's another shelf with a large leather-bound tome and a brazier full of dry tinder that has not been burned. They check the bowl on the top of the pillar and it has some sort of residue inside. They taste it, and based on Matt's description, it sounds like this is a blood bowl. Vax checks the book, which they're getting a strong vibe might be made of human skin, and it's not trapped, but when they try to read it, the text literally seems to get smaller the longer they look at it. It's not just in a language they can't speak, it literally cannot be understood. Now they have a puzzle to work on, and they're relatively certain they're alone in the room. They start using more light sources. We see that Carrick wields a warhammer handle with no hammerhead on it, but when he activates it, the head of the warhammer appears at the end of this iron bar, and this warhammer head seems to be made of light itself. It's like a lightsaber, but with a warhammer instead of a sword. It's very cool. But as they light up this room, the text gets even smaller. It's so much harder to read this book. Allura and Kima and Percy are all checking out the book, but they can't make any sense of it, and the other party members decide to light the brazier. And it explodes. And so does the book. They just simultaneously detonate, and everyone takes some fire damage. And the door is untouched, because this was just a trap meant to screw with anybody who got curious. And of course, it pretty much gave away any chance of surprise they might have had. This is a really clever, nasty trap, and I'm definitely going to steal it for a future campaign. In fact, I'm not sure, but is this the dirtiest trick Matt has ever pulled on the players in the form of a trap? The Dispel Magic glyphs above the River of Acid was also very rough, and then there was that time the Raven Queen's armor killed Vex, but I don't know, man, this one is pretty nasty and very fun. I love it. Vex pours some basilisk blood into the bowl in the middle of the room, but nothing happens, so then she tries to drip some of her own blood into the bowl, and eventually the bowl burns away the basilisk blood, drinks up her blood, and the door raises up. But then they begin to hear laughter, and Pike casts Holy Aura on the party because her players Laura and Liam think this is going to be the fight with Raishan, and they're getting ready for it. However, instead, 4 flaming skulls float into the room, some from the hallway they just came down, and some from the hallway they were about to go down. Matt even mentions that one of these was probably in a bag a few minutes ago. Once again, I love him just cutting to the chase and telling them, hey, you don't have to wonder how you missed these skulls, your characters would figure out what happened, so I'll just tell you. And after they take a quick bathroom break, great place for a break because you know you're coming back to an exciting fight, when they come back to the table, it's initiative, so here are the highlights. Scanlan turns invisible and moves out of the room, which probably saved him from what's about to happen. Vax and Keyleth attack some skulls from range and do some damage, but they feel safe now that they're next to Pyke and protected from undead in her holy aura. Sure, they expected to need to use this against Raishan, but it also messes with undead that attack you in melee, so there's not a bad thing that she cast it. However, what happens next is that they don't attack in melee. Instead, well, because the group is clustered up and the skulls all act on the same initiative turn, they're all able to cast Fireball on the party. So everyone but Scanlan gets hit with 4 fireballs. Flameskulls are nasty. There are some of these that pop up in one of the public adventures that I've run, and man oh man, these things make for a brutal fight, especially when there's more than one of them in the room, because they can combo their attacks like this. They can only cast Fireball once, but if you get hit with multiple fireballs in the same battle, or even in the same turn, that is still a nasty hit. Thankfully, their save DC is pretty low, so the party can pretty easily beat a DC 13. That's what makes them a little bit less dangerous here in this adventure with level 16 player characters, whereas in that published adventure, the players could be anywhere from level 5 to 9, and so even though DC 13 is still pretty easy to beat, you just don't have as many hit points to withstand even taking half that damage. Flameskulls are also really fun undead that you don't tend to see very often, but make perfect sense for the lair of a necromancer. But this also might act as a nice preemptive lesson before they get to the big dragon fight. Don't clump up. They realize they're in another kill box. They're in the center of the room. There are bad guys on all sides of them. I don't know if Matt was doing this on purpose to reinforce a better approach to strategy, but I do think it's a valuable lesson before they fight the ancient poisonous dragon who's also at least a 17th level spellcaster. Do not clump up. Matt also tries to roll all the damage for the individual fireballs separately and then adjudicate how much damage each player takes based on which saves they succeeded at and which ones they failed. But by the time he gets to the second player, he just gives up and starts using average damage. He goes back to the first player and says, okay, we're all using average damage. Here's your actual numbers. Or maybe he just re-rolled the damage and applied it to all the fireballs. But either way, all the fireballs did the same amount of damage, which makes it so much easier to track. I rarely ever use average damage, although in fairness, I also very rarely have 4 simultaneous fireballs get cast on the party, but I generally do try my best to track the damage each enemy does. However, when Matt realized that that's what he wanted to do, but he was having some trouble figuring it out, he made exactly the right call by just going for whatever's going to be the fastest and the most fair. Great move. Anyway, this is actually a pretty fast fight because they kill all the skulls very easily. But they are hurt. And more than that, they realize they are inside of a larger dungeon and not about to encounter the green dragon any second now. And Pyke's spell only lasts for a minute. And unfortunately, it was an 8th level spell. So as it fades, they decide to take a short rest. It won't give Pyke her spell slot back, but at the very least, if they heal up through normal means, she can save her other spell slots for whatever else might come next. Also, something occurred to me while I was recording this video, and not even while I was writing it, while I was filming it, and I want to look something up about the Flameskulls. Hold on. Rejuvenation. If the Flameskull is destroyed, it regains all its hit points in 1 hour unless holy water is sprinkled on its remains, or a dispel magic or remove curse spell is cast on them. So yeah, technically at the end of this short rest, the Flameskulls should have risen again and attacked them. That is really what makes them especially nasty, is how hard they are to really dispose of. But I think Matt just forgot. Oh wait, no, I forgot this short rest is only 30 minutes long, because that's still a house rule that Matt was using. So presumably after the players take their short rest and leave further into the dungeon, the Flameskulls would have just risen and wandered around. So yeah, never mind. I withdraw my criticism. Now, this is interesting. Sam gave instructions for when Scanlan would take his last dose of Sood, the drug he tried to use in the last episode. And based on what he told them, the other players all agree that this is the time it would happen. So Scanlan ducks into a private corner and smokes his last dose. This time he rolls higher on his saving throw, so he gets the effects of the drug. He gets a sorcerer point that will last for 1 hour, and he can use it to extend the duration of one of his spells. He basically gets access to the extended spell metamagic option.
The Sood gives him access to a specific metamagic based on the color of the Sood, and he gets a point.
Oh my God.
The more you use to get more points, the higher the DC gets, and the closer you get to overdosing.
Right. I love it.
So
this is the worst
you
thing
could theoretically die by doing
theoretically
this.
die.
Hey man, it's just another version of Craven Edge. I mean, here we
No,
go.
it's great. This is
I guess.
weirdly.
Yeah,
in a
except I
weird,
had it all
fucked
under
up way.
control.
Sure.
It's funny, I remember being in my 20s and running D&D games, and I did introduce a drug into the game. My players never used it, but I was ready in case they did. Looking back, I'm sure it was inspired by this whole drug storyline, but I actually don't know if we'd gotten to this episode yet. I just introduced drugs because the idea of drugs in D&D was really interesting to me. It was starting to play a role in this campaign, and I made my own version. But I didn't have this drug do anything beneficial. I just figured, no, drugs are bad. You shouldn't take them. But now that I'm in my 30s, I understand that the reason people take drugs is because they at least believe the drugs will do something beneficial in the short term. Whether or not you personally take drugs recreationally or avoid them entirely, I'm sure we can all agree that obviously they have some sort of appeal or people wouldn't do them in the first place. So I really like this design for an in-game drug. It still leans on the whole idea that magic is, in this world, common enough that people could make drugs that essentially enhance your magic, and depending on the world I'm running in, that wouldn't always make sense to me, or at least it would be a little more sought-after substance, not so easy to get your hands on it. But if you set aside the world-building aspect and focus on what it does for the game itself, like mechanically, yeah, this offer is exactly the sort of risk-reward you want when you should do something like drugs into your game. The meta magic represents the short-term burst of energy people tend to associate with certain drugs, which is why they do these kinds of drugs before certain creative tasks that will require a lot of energy, like caffeine pills, or Adderall, or that pill from the movie Limitless, or the pill from the TV show Limitless. But also, once you start taking some kinds of drugs, eventually you will need to take more to get the same effect. And that's represented mechanically by the higher DC. Every time you take some, you're putting more toxic crap into your body because you need more every time, and eventually it'll be too much for you and you will overdose. My own lack of interest in real-world drugs notwithstanding, this is excellent game design, because it works basically the same way as Craven Edge. It's not identical, but the general approach is similar. You're getting something out of it, you're getting this enhancement in your battle and your magic, in this case, but there's also this consequence that might happen if you go too far. So there's this dramatic question being posed to the player. Will they take the temptation and risk a major consequence for more power? That's really good design. Now, Sam told his fellow players what kind of scenario would make Scanlan want to take drugs. And the reason he did that is because this group clearly prioritizes role-playing. For them, it makes perfect sense to say, even though my character isn't present, here's something I would still do. Go ahead and do this even though I'm not there. That is really not something I could recommend you do at your tables unless you are really sure, like these players are, that you and the other players are exactly on the same page about how to handle dramatic situations at the table. In this case, Sam has a lot of trust in his fellow players, but asking your other players to make such a major role-playing decision that's a huge moment in your arc is kind of a huge deal. That being said, if we're talking strategy, that's a different story. It's possible Sam felt like the situation might be dire enough where he would want this magical boost of taking a drug, and he would want that after they took a short rest or something like that, after they got really badly hurt or something. But considering that this decision to take drugs in the first place came about through role-playing, and specifically, Sam did not know what sort of magical drug existed in Matt's world. He was playing a character who was trying to cope with their grief and their frustration by trying to get a drug habit. That's a very different scenario. This feels much more like a role-playing decision, and while his players all understand that this is what would happen right now, that's a lot of burden to put on your fellow players to basically prolong or essentially initiate your drug habit at the table when you're not there, so not something I would typically recommend you do. Now, returning to the dungeon, down the next hallway, there's a long shaft down with a spiral staircase, winding down the wall. Vax doesn't spot any traps, but his wings are already out from the Flameskull fight, and so he flies down and sees some bloody spikes at the bottom of the stairs, with a bunch of skeletons impaled upon them. So they still decide to avoid the stairs in case there's a trap he didn't find. They can just use the flying carpet to journey down the tunnel. The twins grab the gnomes and start flying down with their wings and broom respectively, but as they fly out, a blue glyph starts glowing in the ceiling. But Taliesin has Scanlan immediately try to dispel the rune. Now, this is a situation where normally Matt wouldn't allow a dispel magic to react so quickly, as if it was like a counterspell. But he hasn't described the effects of this rune yet. The players were clearly ready for him to do something to them, so he allows Scanlan to roll to see if he's able to react fast enough to stop it. He's very clear that this is not how the rules work, but he's going to allow it. And Scanlan rolls pretty well, so Scanlan, as played by Taliesin, is able to dispel this rune with a song.
As he shrieks upward and releases the spell, you watch as the glyph that was glowing
Rock
temporarily
glyph.
fades.
You don't have to turn on the blue lights. Rock glyph.
Oh, shit.
Yes.
I mean, come on.
You don't have to give our bodies to the spikes. Love you, Sam. Love you.
That was good.
That's good.
The trap is dispelled, and they keep caravanning the group down via Vax's wings, Vex's broom, and the carpet, still careful to avoid the stairs just in case. But the rune never glows again, so they have bypassed the flying aspect of this trap. At the bottom of the chamber, Vax looks for traps again, but he rolls a natural 1. But he's not going to spend a luck this time. I think he's starting to worry about resources heading into the dragon fight. Because ultimately that is the purpose of this dungeon, to soften them up and get them to waste resources before they reach the dragon. They're now entering a section of the dungeon that is a lot more like an existing underground cave, rather than the carved walls and floors of the first floor. And they enter a cavern with a ravine in the middle and a rope bridge crossing the ravine. Vax wants to fly across, but Matt warns him that his wings would be just about done. They popped his wings out before their short rest, and the wings only last for an hour. So even though the short rest was allowed to be only 30 minutes long, you know, they had to fly up and down the shaft a bunch of times, so he's really riding the line of whether or not they would expire. He can test his luck or not. Liam decides to still try to cross the ravine, and so Matt rolls a die behind the screen, trying to figure out whether or not the wings will expire while he's trying to cross. And they do. The wings vanish. But before he can fall into the ravine, presumably, Vax throws his dagger into the rock wall to teleport over to it, and he climbs up on the other side. Vex was also flying over, and Matt describes how the broom feels really wobbly. She's having a hard time getting her bearings. It almost feels like she's flying drunk, but she's not drunk at all, and she's fine when she reaches the other side. Percy grabs a rope and starts to walk across the bridge because he knows he has the boots of spider climb. It's actually really funny that he's the one who tries to cross because his boots are clinging to the bridge, which is why he's able to cross at all. Because while things just feel weird for him, everyone else can see that his hair is standing straight up and the bridge is sagging up, as if his weight is pulling it up instead of down. When anyone enters the ravine, gravity is reversed for them. Vex flies over again with this new knowledge. She barrel rolls into flying upside down while she's over the ravine, and yeah, confirmed. She's fine. At this point, they're discussing how they're going to get across, and a body flies past, falling from the bottom of the ravine up towards the ceiling. A skeletal body, almost completely decomposed, but still moving. And as they watch, more bodies continue to fall, or rise, I guess, but we'll say fall. And these bodies are getting more frequent. Vex flies across with Pike on the broom, and a few bodies fly up at them, and one of them collides with them, setting the trio of them spiraling into the air. Vex is knocked off the broom, but she's still tethered to it, and Pike is grabbing onto it, but they're still wrestling with this zombie. At this point, everybody wants to react and try to do something to stop this situation, and I really would have had them roll initiative here. I have the benefit of hindsight, of course, but initiative isn't just helpful when you're fighting enemy forces, it's also helpful when you have a bunch of people who all want to act immediately and everybody's lobbying to be the next person to react, because everybody, very reasonably, feels like they would instantly react to the fact that Vex and Pike are flying into the air. Some of them have good plans. Some of them have bad plans. But all of them want to be the next person to react. Matt even has to tell them to just give them a second to help adjudicate what everybody wants to do, because they're all just climbing over each other practically to be the next one to talk. So this is really a situation where I think initiative is necessary. A map would also be extremely helpful, even a crude map without a lot of details. Marisha wants to use a grasping vine from the ravine wall, and Matt says she's too far away, and Marisha's confused. You said that Vex and Pike were 30 feet away, but he clarifies they're 30 feet away horizontally, but 15 or 20 feet up. Now, technically speaking, that doesn't matter, rules as written. Generally in 5e, according to the rules, you only calculate the furthest distance horizontally or vertically. You don't combine them together the way you would in real life. If someone's 30 feet away horizontally and 15 or 20 feet away vertically, they're considered 30 feet away, so according to the rules, Marisha is right. But of course, Matt doesn't have to rule it that way. It's absolutely within his purview to say the vertical distance should also be factored into the situation. That's totally fine. And that's why instead of just pushing back and saying no, Marisha says, okay, is there some other surface, like another wall of the ravine that would be within 30 feet of the party members? After all, grasping vine doesn't have to come from her. It comes from a point she chooses. So she's wondering if there's a point she can choose that's closer, if that will work. He takes a look at his notes to figure out the answer. And of course, everyone's still talking over each other, which adds to the confusion and the chaos. Which of course means the people in the chat, or the people in the YouTube comments rather, who are already critical of Marisha, no pun intended, well, this scene hits their confirmation bias. They think this is another example of her not knowing her spells, or of her just essentially pestering Matt into just giving her what she wants, because they always think that's what's happening, even though it's clearly not what's happening, which it usually is not. And yeah, all the cast members are pestering Matt, because they all want to do things. That's not exclusive to Marisha. You know what would help with that? Initiative. And Marisha also knows how her spell works, she just doesn't know the terrain. She's going off of what Matt said earlier, and he's still trying to figure out if there's a way she can use the spell still, because that's what she wants to do. She would know this terrain better than the player actually does, because she can't see it. You know what would help with that? A map. Matt decides the best way to figure out whether or not Marisha can do this is, once again, to essentially ask for a reaction roll. Not in the Daggerheart sense, but basically an initiative roll to see if she's able to cast the spell fast enough before her allies leave the range of the spell. She rolls well, and Matt gives this awesome description of how the vine breaks out of the stone of some section of the terrain. I'm not really following exactly where. I really would also like a map. But the vine shoots out and snags onto the broom so Vex and Pike won't fall all the way to the ceiling. And as they look up, down, they look at the ceiling, and they see at the top of the ravine, where they're falling towards, a writhing mass of hundreds and hundreds of undead corpses, all clawing at them and trying to get them, waiting to tear them apart if they complete their fall and reach the ceiling. Pike uses her channel divinity to kill the zombie hitchhiker, and Carrick and Keyleth take the carpet to go pick up their allies. But at this point, clusters of bodies start to fly up the ravine. First as clumps, but finally, once the carpet reaches the broom and everyone starts making their way across together, they have to deal with one last burst of bodies, in the form of a huge skeletal hand made of corpses. I really like the way Matt ramps up the danger in that way. It's basically like that scene in the Matrix Revolutions where first you have to deal with a bunch of individual sentinels, then groups of them, and finally you have to deal with one huge swarm of them all constructed together to form one big hand. It doesn't make any sense. It never makes any sense, but I'm not going to pretend I don't always still love it. Carrick's able to use his own channel divinity to neutralize the undead and scatter the hand, and they fly to safety on the other side of the ravine with Vax and Percy. At this point, there's another cluster that rams into the bridge and it snaps. But Scanlan and Grog are still on the other side. They haven't crossed yet. Vex takes Trinket out of the necklace and then flies over to put Scanlan on the broom and Grog in the necklace. She dodges two more groups of corpses on her way over to them, then she picks them up, but then when she flies back, a mouth made of corpses rises up to attack, gnashing at her. I think Matt was probably struggling to come up with new ways to describe the big swarms of enemies, since the hand was so good. The mouth feels like an afterthought, but it's still a decent solution. They avoid the bite and they land safely on the opposite side of the ravine, and now they've all crossed. Also, we never saw what was at the actual bottom of the ravine. Was there just a huge collection of zombies clinging to the ground, like they were on the monkey bars? Would they essentially be hanging like bats, waiting to see someone below them, and then they drop? I mean, I guess they wouldn't get tired, and they don't only fall when their fingers decayed so much they couldn't hang on. Oh, weird. Also, once again, I think they forgot about Kima and Allura, but it's fine. They're in the next scene with the rest of the party, so they got across at some point. We can say they hitched along with Keyleth and Carrick on the carpet. It's fine. In the next chamber, they find a multi-tiered fountain with multiple bowls of water, but sinister, with the top dispenser is like a freaky-looking face. Water is trickling up out of it, pouring up towards the ceiling. So again, we have a weird gravity situation here. The passage continues past this fountain, and Vex can sense the same three dragon life forms further down the hall. So theoretically, they just walk past the fountain. This isn't an obvious obstacle, and as far as they can tell, it's not even a trap. But of course, they don't trust it. They investigate the fountain, and they determine that anything they throw in the dry fountain, small rocks, their own spit, they don't just float up immediately. So there's not a same sort of gravity well around this whole region. It seems more specific than that. Percy climbs onto the ceiling and sees that the water is splashing onto a green gem on the ceiling before it trickles into the rocks and into the cracks and things. But it's not residuum. The green gem is not that. Percy prepares to cover the gem with the alchemy jug if it does anything, and everyone else just moves forward, and nothing happens. So, we're good. The twins see flickering light down both sides of the forked tunnel. They both seem to curve back and rejoin on the other side of what is essentially just a column of rock. So Matt's not trying to give them a choice between two hallways and failing to give them anything to actually discern between the difference of them. No, they both lead to the same point. The flickering light is coming from the same room at the end of both hallways where they meet up at the next chamber, which is actually going to be very clear why he did that in the next episode when it becomes more of a strategic scenario. We'll talk about it then. Grog wants to pour something into the fountain because he wants to fuck with it. And Percy isn't articulating what he wants to do, but he wants to do something. It's driving him crazy. He needs to know what this does. It wouldn't be here for no reason. It has to do something. He wants to know what it does.
This has been driving me crazy. What does this light switch do?
Oh, nothing.
Did it drive you crazy to have a switch and not know what it did?
I know what it did. Nothing.
But Matt knows that pouring water into the fountain isn't going to do anything. But, interestingly, he kind of just gives the players the answer. Or rather, he has Allura step in and give them the answer. He doesn't phrase it that way, but that's functionally what happens. She's worried about Grog messing with this magical, evil fountain when they don't know what it does, but she has her own theory, and she tests it by placing a jug in the water and letting it be carried up to cover the gem. And when that happens, there's no immediate consequence. And she says her theory must have been wrong. Before she can explain what she thought would happen, they begin hearing lots of thuds from the chamber they just left. All the corpses are now falling into the ravine all at once. That gravity just returned to normal back there. This is weird. I do like that there's a way to essentially turn the gravity on and off, so if the players wanted to, they could cross back normally on the other side. Or you can still preserve the idea that some zombies are clinging to the ceiling and they might fall back down towards them to kind of get the reverse of the scene we just had earlier. But also, how would this work? Would Opash need to drop a jug into the water every time he wanted to flip the gravity? Would he have to then break the jug again when he wanted to turn the trap back on? This is a weird thing to focus on, but I understand why this is here within the mechanics of a D&D game. It's a really interesting and cool way to turn the trap on and off, but I'm not sure I understand why a character would have designed it this way. But still, it's a weird, fun puzzle, and really that's all it needs to be. That perfectly serves its purpose for this episode. There's something called the refrigerator test, which Alfred Hitchcock coined, which is you go see a movie, you enjoy the movie, you go home, you go to sleep, in the middle of the night you wake up to go get a glass of milk, and as you open the fridge and you're holding the milk, you think, wait, that scene in the movie made no sense. And he thinks, well, then I won. I was able to convince you that the movie made sense until you were home and asleep. That's all I needed to do. It doesn't need to be bulletproof. The plot doesn't need to be without sin, to reference a certain channel that I despise, but it just has to function for the purposes of you enjoying the movie. That's kind of what this is for me. When you're watching it, you're like, oh, okay, cool. But when you're sort of analyzing the show as I do with my sort of overly analytical brain, you're like, yeah, it doesn't really make any sense, but it's interesting, and that's really all it needed to be. Anyway, the twins pick a hallway, and they sneak down that hallway, and they see the room from Keyless Vision. A study lit by candelabras. There's 2 red eggs in there, untouched. There's a huge red dragon corpse, and a woman with green hair reading a book. And that's the end of the game. But before we wrap up today, I'd love for you to stick around for just a few more minutes, because I'm going to talk for just a couple minutes about politics. Don't leave. We're not going to talk about policy. We're not going to talk about current events. We're not really going to even talk about politics. We're going to talk about talking about politics. I know that sounds insufferable, but again, it'll be just a second. Now, I haven't really brought up politics in these videos for the past few months, besides a passing reference. I haven't had a whole section about it in a while, and that's for a few reasons. First, things are moving so fast that it just feels impossible for me to address things when they actually feel timely, especially with the turnaround on my videos not always being as fast as I would like. I can't even talk about the things that are happening in the D&D community in a timely fashion, so it's really tough to offer commentary about the latest horrors of the Trump presidency. But I've also been thinking about why I wanted to talk about politics in my videos in the first place. The original goal in the first year of my channel was just to make my stance clear on important issues so the right-wing chuds would know I'm not on their side. These days, the wallpaper accomplishes that very well. The second goal was to try to present some facts via my largest platform, this channel, to try to reach a wider audience that might feel otherwise apathetic about politics, and try to get them politically engaged. But looking at the results of the election that just happened earlier this month, yeah, I think it's safe to say political apathy is not a huge issue right now. But the final reason I talk about politics on my ostensibly D&D channel was to try to reach out to people who feel differently than I do and try to break through the misinformation they've been hearing leading up to the election or over the last several months of just general chaos, and try to present them with actual facts and maybe change some minds. Lately, I just don't know how much I'm succeeding at that challenge. Usually what will happen is I'll talk about politics in a video and I'll get a comment from people who don't want to hear about politics on a D&D channel, and usually those people just wind up being conservatives who just don't want to hear about my politics. Somehow they don't mind it when other people talk about other politics, they just don't want to hear about mine. But oftentimes I'll still talk with them in the comments and try to be respectful and make my positions clear, and usually they appreciate that, but I'm not really able to change their minds. And that's not terribly surprising. It's YouTube comments. It's a pretty uphill battle, but sometimes I can't even get them to understand my arguments. No matter how many times I make it clear, they'll always sort of reframe, oh, so you believe this? No, that's not what I believe. I thought I made that pretty clear. And at a certain point, if I'm just going to sit around on my phone typing for 15 or 30 minutes trying to find the perfect way to make my point only for the person I'm talking to still not understand it, I might as well just work on a script instead and try to get ahead of schedule on my videos. So lately, it's just been tough to try to find the time to talk about politics in the way that still feels timely and where I still feel like I'm adding something to the conversation. And well, again, while I don't really care about the people who don't want to hear about politics they disagree with, when someone does stick around and they try to engage in good faith, which isn't every time, but it does happen, I'm still having a hell of a time trying to get through to them in any meaningful way. And so I haven't really been dealing with politics that much in my videos. And that's kind of a bummer because I like talking about politics sometimes. I even got a comment on one of my Critical Role Demystified videos where they're like, oh, no politics, now we're back. And I'm like, motherfucker, I'm going to include some politics for you. But it's kind of hard to do that still. But then I got a comment, or more specifically, a reply on their earlier comment that changed things. A while back, I got one of those comments, I don't come to this channel for politics, and we had a little discussion in the comments. He clearly did not understand any of the points I was making and thought I was demonizing all Trump voters, which is not my point and is not a thing that I do. I'm not happy with all Trump voters, but I don't demonize them all. That's not the same thing. I was demonizing all ICE agents. I stand by that one. But then a month later, I realized this person had replied. I'd never seen it, but they'd responded and asked me my opinion about some recent events. Well, recent, a month ago. He was kind of, again, challenging my position, or what he thought was my position, in light of some of the major controversies that happened a month ago, maybe more like 2 months ago. And once again, I tried to talk to him in the comments, didn't really get anywhere, but I told him, okay, you know what? You originally said you didn't want politics on my D&D videos, but now you're keen to hear the political beliefs of a D&D YouTuber? Okay, your wish is granted. I will answer that question. Next week, I'm going to talk about politics.
Remember, you wanted this.
But I am genuinely making D&D videos next week, so if you're Butthole Titan because you think you're going to get a sermon or a lecture, don't worry. You are going to get some genuinely, I hope, interesting D&D videos and also some politics. And I think I've struck a balance that I think a lot of you are going to be happy with. And if you're not, hopefully it leads to an interesting discussion in the comments where maybe we can have a more fruitful conversation. So thank you so much for watching, and make sure to come back next week for those videos, including the video where we talk about episode 83 of Critical Role, The Deceiver's Stand, where Vox Machina has their rematch with Raishan. And make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you catch not just that video, but all the videos I have coming out next week. You are going to like them. And if you don't, that's okay too. That's fine. But I hope you're going to like them. And make sure to click right here to watch a video where I start building a new campaign setting. I think a lot of people missed that video because it was very similar in title and thumbnail to another video, but I really hope people watch that one. I'm very proud of it. It's the beginning of a new campaign setting I'm building, and you might want to watch that one before next week's videos. Until next time, play fair and have fun.